Deep relaxing breath. In and out. As we hold the space for our community here in Fort Worth. To envision Harmony Spiritual Center filled with the joy and laughter of the community here in Fort Worth, with new families and young people seeing our vision. As we think and imagine together, so it becomes. And so it is.
And
Amen.
so it is. Thank you. Good morning, beloveds.
Good morning.
It's so very good to see you. Always good to see you. You look great. Thank you, those of you who are joining us on Facebook. Welcome. We're so glad that you're spending this time with us. Well, it's just, I love how we talk about connection all the time. And when we see things that show up in our lives, that show us how much we are connected. So I wanted to talk about some things this morning, but again, as we were in our class this morning, and we're doing a class, we're calling it Demystifying Love. Because of course, love is our highest synonym for God. And what we're doing is talking about the unity principles and the science of mind, belief statements, and how we actually love one another and ourselves first. And so it's a really great class, and we're talking about joy and just the joy of knowing the breath of God. Thank you, Malcolm. Just where is he at? There you go. Malcolm, beautiful. Just really, wonderful, wonderful stuff. Really put us in place. And so I was thinking about last week. Did you guys see the game last week? Anybody cares about the game? Yeah. I don't normally care, but I do love the commercials, which they had some really good ones this time.
It was super.
It was good one. Good one. It was super. So I went to my sister's house, and before that, it was actually just a great weekend. Okay? So Ken and I got to be a part of a music retreat, which was fabulous, and what was revealed to me at that retreat was some release of some fear that I didn't even know I had around songwriting. And so that was released, and so songs have been flowing. It's been really great. Spent the weekend with my sister at her place, and she's, as you guys have tasted some of her foods, and she's a caterer. So when we get together, I'm like, God, she's cooking for an army, so much food, and we try to eat it all. So, and then there's her granddaughter, which is my grandniece, Nyla. I talk about her all the time. She calls me Aunt Panda. When I come to see her, it's like she's just seeing an old friend. She just runs to the door, really just runs into my arms, and, oh, Aunt Panda, can I sleep with you tonight? Can we have, oh, yes, baby, let's do, And so it was just so much love. It was really wonderful. And so Monday morning, I left to come back here and met up with some friends, and felt myself I was tired. I thought, what is happening? I ended up having to cut some meetings I was going to go to and go home and fall in the bed. And so I caught a cold. And I don't know what happens to you when you're not feeling well. But what happens to me is you don't want to be around. Let me just say that. I get pretty cranky with myself. I'm upset. Why am I even sick right now? Because I don't even believe in this. Right? I ain't believe in this nonsense. So what's happening? And so anyway, I started thinking about life. Right? I'm just sitting there because I got nothing to do. I can't do anything but sleep and wake up, and blow my nose. So I'm thinking about it and talking with Spirit and wondering, how does that happen? That you just go from this joyous place, true joy, around family and love, to this place of feeling sad. And I was actually feeling grief, loss. I wasn't able to work. I wasn't able to go and do some things that I wanted to do. And I wanted to talk about that to you guys here today. Because are you having a hard time seeing me? I am naturally, if you didn't notice this, I'm naturally an optimistic and gregarious person. I know you didn't know, but I just wanted to share that. And it's difficult for me to be sad. It's difficult for me to be angry. It doesn't come easily. But when I am there, I'm there, and I don't want to be here. And so I want to talk with you because it seems like I'm up here all the time talking about how wonderful life is, and it is. But it would be remiss on my part if I didn't tell you about how it happens when things aren't going well. What happens when things aren't going well? And how do we deal with sadness, loss, and grief? So I wanted to talk with you this morning about the fallacy of fear. Oh, there it is. The fallacy of fear. Because what good does it do us to know what we know, to know God, to be around this tribe of people whose understanding of God is the same, is alike, this new thought movement? What good is it if we have to endure grief, pain, sorrow, and loss? Well, number one, life happens, right? And that is part of the fullness of life. It's about balance, right? And I'll talk about some other things in a minute about that, but it is really about the fullness of life, and we really cannot have one without the other. There's just no way to do that. So how does knowing this, what we know, who we know we are, who we know ourselves to be, how does that help us through these times when we're not as joyous as we'd like to be? How does that happen? And so what I want to talk about is the fallacy of fear, because fear it's a natural thing. It is about survival, right? Fear is about survival. The reason we are fearful, harkens way back in the whole, saber-toothed tiger thing. You don't want to get out there and start waving lights in front of the saber-tooth. Doesn't make any sense. You're going to probably get eaten. And then your whole line will be gone. So, your whole family. So, it's about survival. But Charles Darwin was talking about this, and I'm trying to get a handle on fear. Because obviously the whole evolutionary process, and he gets that the way we're going to evolve and become more is because we do have fear that keeps us safe. But he did this experiment with fear. And what he did was he went to a zoo, and he stood in front of a puff adder, which is one of those poisonous snakes. He stood in front of their window. He was in their place, and he stood in front of their window just to see if he could logically talk himself out of being fearful of this snake. Well, of course, the snake, saw him. He was like, what's, food. And so, boom, jumped at the window where he was standing, and of course, he just jumped back. So his realization was this: my will and reason were powerless against the imagination of a danger which had never been experienced. He had never been bitten. He had never been bitten by a snake. And yet he jumped back. Logically, he knew he should not have. But this is what's key to me, is that my will and reason were powerless against the imagination of a danger which had never been experienced. So this speaks to the power of our imagination, to be able to imagine the worst all the time. I used to be afraid of flying. Now I'm tense, but not afraid. So it hasn't gone completely, but I'm not afraid. And what happened was, it's kind of dumb, but I started working for Continental Airlines, and I started as a mechanic. And I knew I would take a few trips, and I was just white knuckling it and drinking before I got on the plane and all this type of nonsense. And so I just thought, you know what? The issue is, I just need to fly more and to get over myself. So I'm going to become a stewardess or an attendant. I'm going to become an attendant. And people around me are like, are you insane? You are afraid of flying, and now you want to become an attendant? What is the matter with you? Well, it didn't work out because for other reasons. But I did start flying more. And the more I experienced what really happened on a plane, the more I got around pilots who fly all the time, attendants and all of that, my fears lessened, because the reality was that it was nothing to be afraid of. So while you can't talk yourself out of things, your experiences can bring those fears down to almost negligible when you have more positive experiences around the things that we are afraid of. So that worked for me, and it was less than almost gone. We have this fear, because my title is about the fallacy of fear, but I also want to talk about grief and sorrow. And we have this fear around grief and sorrow. We don't want to be sad. We don't want to experience loss. I've told this story a few times, and I will tell it from here again because it's one of the deepest sorrows that I had in my life. And it was the loss of my son, not the physical loss, he's not dead. And we are back together. But he was someone that wanted to go live with his father. His father and I, his father was my high school sweetheart. And for those of you who are not still married to your high school sweetheart, you know how that can go. It's generally not the best marriage. Not a really good idea, but sometimes it works out. This one did not. And so my son, who really loved his father, and there's a whole thing with women and mothers and guys and their fathers, and he wanted to go live with his father. Well, I didn't want him to go, and for a mother to let her child go, even to a parent, was very difficult. But I did. I let him go. Thinking, my reasoning was, first of all, that's what he wanted, and I didn't want to fight him the whole time. But the other thing was that at some point he'll be an adult, and he'll make his own decision up, and he'll return to me, right? That was my thinking, that he would return to me. But he didn't. And he was a grown-up, and he was having a family, and he was having children, and we still did not have a relationship. And I would call every New Year's Day. I would call and say, honey, son, let's work this out, whatever this is. Let's work it out. Because I would try to call him, and he would just basically bum rush me off the phone. Hey, Mom, I'm busy. Love to talk to you. I'll talk to you later. Boom! What just happened there? So every January, I'd call and say, son, let's let this go. He goes, yeah, let's do that, Mom. Let's just develop a relationship. And then never hear from him again. Never hear from him again. So finally, I'm sitting in meditation one morning, and I say to George, what's happening with my son? What am I supposed to be doing? And George said to me, you have done what you can do. It is no longer up to you. Just stand. Just stand in your faith. Okay, all right, I'll do that. 2 years, I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating. 2 years, every single morning at my meditation time, I cried. Just tears. I just cried. It took me 2 years to mourn that loss. That's what it takes. And there's no telling what it takes, but that's what we're afraid of. How will I survive? How will my heart repair? How will we survive? Isn't that a question we ask ourselves? Not only about the person that we've lost, because if it's actually a physical loss, I lost my mother, I lost my sister, I'm sure at this stage we've all lost someone. How do we endure the actual loss of somebody, but then how do we endure a broken heart? How do we endure a broken heart? Well, what I know about fear, what I know about us, is that the heart is actually big enough to expand. The heart is big enough to expand and to take on what it is that we must deal with. And my question, of course, is then, for you, what does fear and grief have to do with living well? Because that was my proposition, right? That to have a life well lived, we experience all of it. Joys, grief, sorrow, out of it. How do you know? How do you know in your life what is good or what is not? How do you know if a job, like I was going to take that job as a airline stewardess, airline flight attendant. How do you know when something is good for you or not? When it's the right thing to do? How do you know? You feel it?
Doors start opening.
Doors start opening. Doors start opening. Conversely, when it's not right, what happens?
Doors shut.
It's that simple. No, it's that simple. Doors just start shutting. You don't quite know why, but they're shutting. The other thing that happens is that when I was getting ready to do take the flight attendants, I was taking the course and was actually going to do it and taking a few trips. I was so panicky, I didn't think it would be good, and they didn't think it would be good for the passengers. Right? And it was a good idea. So I learned by doing. I learned by doing it. Oh, that's too soon. Too soon for that job. So that's how we know. We experience things. We know what is good, what is not, what works and what does not, through the experiences of our lives. I want to tell you that going through grief, you don't really want to hear this, but I do know this, that when you come out of grief onto the other side, the joys are much greater. I'll tell you that. The joys are much greater. Even the joys that you experienced with the loss that you had. The loss of the person, the loss of the thing, whatever it is, the joys are greater. That much I do know. So, do we need peaks and valleys? Do we need the yin and yang? I don't know that we do yin and yang. I don't know that we need it, but I know that it is what it is. There's no point in asking about whether we do or we don't need it. It is what it is. And what I do know is what happens when we come out of it is that we do have more balance in our life. The thing about fear is that we don't want too much of it. I didn't want to be paralyzed and not be able to fly, not be able to go where I need to go, right? So in some way, we've got to deal with the fear so it's not too much, but not too little, so we're not running out in the middle of the street and getting run down by a bus. So what is it that we need to do? There's balance and there's juxtaposition. So what am I trying to tell you here today? What is the learning? What is the takeaway? That fear both saves you and it closes doors. It saves you, but it also closes doors if we don't balance it out. If we don't balance it out. That is the fallacy of fear. We feel like it's protecting us, and in some points it is, but in some points it's keeping us from our greater good. It is keeping us from our greater good. We don't need to fear loss or grief. We'll come through on the other side because our hearts are big enough. Because the joy is great as we move forward through our life. What's on the other side of grief and fear? What's through the door? Thinking about it sometimes is so much worse than what it actually is. We just have to walk through it. There's nothing more to do. Many of us in this room, well, all of us actually in this room have recently had some experiences of grief, having lost a dear one here, all of us. And yet when we think about that loved one, there's nothing but joy. There's nothing but joy. Yes, we would love to have that dear one still with us on this plane, but the person has not left, right? That person and that love is still with us. We will never, ever lose that. It's not possible because that's how big the heart is, to encompass love and life in all of its iteration. So what do we do in New Thought? What are the tools that we have when we are experiencing grief and loss? This past week, I used it all. I used it all, and I cannot say it more or more often. Take a picture if you don't really know all of these things, it's okay. But affirmative prayer is just the thing I start with. It's just the thing I start with. My connection, our connection. When we talk about affirmative prayer, we talked about RUCAT, which is the beginning of recognizing that God is all. God is source energy. God is able. And the God in us, because we are God, right? We are individualized expressions of the God. So we remember that and know that we have affirmative prayer. And when I was in the middle of the pain of having lost my son, I reached out and said, what is mine to do here? Help me. Because I was just, that's the power we have. And that's where the help came from. That's where the help comes from. Meditation. Every morning I was there to remind me, because I would have kept reaching out. And it would have done no good because my work was done. It was not my job anymore. It was not my job. What is yours to do? That's what Spirit knows. That's what your higher self knows. What is yours to do? We have affirmations and denial, where we affirm the truth and deny what is not. That is not true for me. Here's my truth. That is not true for me. Whatever is showing up, whatever critic is in your head, you're not worthy. That is not true. I am worthwhile. I am a child of God. All the things that show up. You will not survive this heartbreak. That is not true. Because I have loved well. And the person and things that I've missed are worthy to be missed. They're worth my love and longing for them, for it. They're worth it. They're worth it. That is the truth. Declare what is true. Declare what is true. I am an individualized expression of God, and my heart is large and able. It will stretch and reach and meet the need, whatever the need may be. It will do so. It will do so. Even though it doesn't feel like it will. It will. It will. We are around our tribe. I call you guys up, hey, I need a little help, please. Somebody remind me of who I am. Somebody remind me of who we are. Look around this room right now. Look around. This is our tribe. Everybody in here knows what you know. And when you forget, reach out and be reminded. We have prayer ministries. We have individualized. We have everyone here. All the love you need is right here in this room. And the final thing, surrender. Just give it over. We keep thinking we're going to work it out. If I just call my son one more time, it'll change. If I just let it go and ask God, what is the next thing? It's not a God out there. We don't believe in that. It's the God in here that knows everything we need to know in every moment. Surrender. Surrender to the truth of who you are. What I want to say to you, I know this is a difficult talk. I talked about it. I walked around my house talking and crying because I didn't want to be up here crying because I know it's a difficult talk, but it's a necessary talk because this is life. And I don't want to, what we do here in New Dawn is act like it's not okay to be sad. We act like it's not okay to grieve because we're New Dawn. We know the truth. We have to be positive. We have to, yes, we are. We're all those things. But we're also human beings living this human experience. And we are sad, and we do experience grief. And we need one another to be able to do that. To be able to do that. To say it is okay. And we will not only survive, but thrive through whatever it is we're going to. So, our hearts are resilient. It is difficult for me, I think for many people, because I am naturally I wake up being very happy. Jason and I used to stop in we'd be out and about, just always going someplace, and we'd stop in just hungry, just get a quick bite. And we'd stop at McDonald's, which we can't stand. And we stop at McDonald's and we take a bite of this burger. I took a bite of the burger and I don't like this burger. He said, I don't like it either. Okay, let's not go. Let's just take McDonald's off the list. Okay, great. Good, we're gonna do that. So we're out and about, because there's a McDonald's at every corner. I'm hungry, me too. Hey, there's a McDonald's. Let's stop. So we stop, we get the burger, we start to eat it. We're looking at each other like, we don't like these burgers. Haven't we had this conversation before? Seriously, yeah, we did have this. All right, so we're done. We're done with the burger. Yep, done. Out and about. Hungry. There's McDonald's. I'm not kidding. So we stop in, we have the burger. We both throw it in the bag, back in the bag. We look at each other. We've definitely had this conversation. We're done, right? We're done. So now our hearts are in it, our emotions are in it, we're done, and we have not been back to a McDonald's. But that's what it takes, right? Just to remember, to think, to know, to change your trajectory, the things that you normally do. It takes that. And it's okay if you fall back. It's all right, because that's human beings, so we do. But at some point, we just say, we're done, completely done with this. And that's how life goes. We're never, if you are a loving individual, and if you're in this room, you are. This room is nothing but love. everyone that comes here, all the guests that we have, the singers that we have, everyone that comes in this place, I'm telling you, they come back and tell me how much love there is in this room. That is the reputation that you have here. That's what Harmony has. So there's nothing but love here. So we're going to be loving individuals. That's who we are. And we're going to experience sorrow because we love. If we didn't love, we wouldn't be sad. Do you get that? If we didn't open our hearts, we would never feel sorrow. But then we'd also never live. We would never really live. So that's what we do here. Our hearts are resilient, and so are you. Your heart is big enough. Our hearts are big enough. So the final question, what has God to do with this? Everything. Because in the midst of the sorrow, we know that joy cometh in the morning. We know that. Namaste.